With Lenny being added to the game, we now have 3 bow users who have charge attacks as a central part of their kit. And just to preempt some comments that I know are coming, Yoimiya and Farazan don't count in this category. Despite the fact that when you look at the 3 kits of these characters on paper, they can kind of look a little bit similar, they really do play quite differently. Ganyu has a kit that really lends well to AoE situations. Even if you're playing something like Melt Ganyu that can feel rather single target, it's hard to ignore the fact that you are still shooting these big nukes out that have massive AoE. Tighnari, on the other hand, has incredible single target and almost no AoE capabilities no matter how you build them. And now we have Lyney, who's doing a little bit of both things actually. So for you to understand some of the differences between these characters, you first need to understand what Lyney does. To start off, you of course have his charge attack, and at first this is going to look a lot more complicated than Tighnari and Ganyu's. If Lyney's HP is above 60% when he fires a level 2 charge arrow, some of his HP will be consumed to gain a stack. The stacks are tracked to the left of Lyney's head, and they can stack up to 5. These empower Lyney's skill, which we will get to shortly. The level 2 charge shot itself looks pretty ordinary, but when it hits something, you summon the Grim Malkin Cat. The cat is going to act as a taunt, but it does have a limitation on how often it can taunt, so it's not too ridiculous because there's no cooldown on how often you can summon these. Lyney's elemental skill is where he gets a chance to spend the stacks that he earns from not only his charge shot, but his elemental burst as well. You get a significant damage boost for each stack spent, as well as 20% of his max HP and healing, meaning yeah, you could heal him from 1 HP to full health. Granted, it's not exactly realistic to pull that off by yourself, and it is still recommended that you do have a healer with him. The skill by itself gives him a pretty good distinction between him, Tighnari, and Ganyu. Tighnari and Ganyu's elemental skills are useful, but you can leave them at level 1 with very little impact on your overall damage, where Lyney's ends up being quite the nuke in comparison. Now Lyney's elemental burst, and surprise! It's another nuke. He really is living that most authentic pyro life, isn't he? Lyney's elemental burst allows him to run around and hit each enemy once. Once the duration ends naturally or by being cancelled, he then summons a Grim Malkin Hat that his charge attack normally summons and does AoE pyro damage as well. I did also mention that his elemental burst and his charge shots generate stacks. The elemental burst does generate 1 no matter how many enemies you hit, it will always be 1. So you might be thinking to yourself, he has 3 useful abilities that all do good damage. How are you going to reliably provide elemental reactions for them? Well, you don't. You see, with Lyney's A4 passive, he's incredibly encouraged to build a mono pyro team. If you happen to also roll for his signature weapon, that will be encouraging you to do so as well. The weapon isn't even necessary though. This passive is strong enough on its own that you should be building a mono pyro team with Lyney. Not only that, but with all the different abilities he uses that function in different ways, he really can't reliably vape, and it would just be easier to play mono pyro. And that is where one of the first big differences between these 3 units comes in. The thing with Tighnari and Ganyu is that depending on what playstyle you play those 2 characters in, you may not necessarily care about all your abilities. Tighnari is a little bit different because he wasn't designed to actually stay on the field and constantly do charge attacks. Unless you actually get his C6, it's just really not a viable playstyle for him. So if you were looking for someone to compete with Ganyu in that way, Lyney is technically the first one. The charge time of their actual level 2 charge shot is virtually identical. So if you're like me and you actually enjoy Ganyu's charge shot playstyle, then Lyney is going to be one of the next best characters for you. Tighnari is a very fun character and I do enjoy his playstyle, but it's just not the same as Ganyu's. If you want that kind of playstyle, Tighnari's not going to give it to you. He needs to spam all of his abilities very quickly, get his 3 charge attacks off, and then let someone else take the field. Whereas Lyney gives me that feeling of that Ganyu playstyle where I want to stay on field, I want to use his charge attacks as much as possible, but he also has other abilities that are useful, and you don't have to play something like the Morgana team to make that true. Lyney just has a bunch of AoE nukes, some of them doing fantastic AoE damage while his charge attack does excellent single target damage. He's a very well balanced all around character, and he's kind of like I think he's in the middle of Ganyu and Tighnari. Just to be clear, not in terms of viability, just playstyle alone. In my time playing Lyney, I really enjoyed his playstyle. I got the feeling of playing that old school Ganyu where I just ran around the overworld shooting my nukes in the middle of packs and just watching them all blow up, but I also had other abilities that were useful, and that's something that you just don't really get the feeling of when you're playing something like Melt Ganyu. And then when you're playing something like Morgana Ganyu, then you feel like your charge shots aren't really important and you don't really get a lot of time to do them. In my opinion, one of the biggest trade-offs for this is his team building. With being so heavily encouraged to go towards mono pyro, he's not going to have nearly as many open teams as Ganyu and Tighnari have. Ganyu alone has Melt Ganyu, which has like 5 different variants to it, and Tighnari can go with almost any other Dendro or Electro unit in the game in some capacity. Lyney, on the other hand, is more limited with needing aiming to bring at least 2 pyro teammates to maximize his damage bonus. A lot of the time, this is going to mean bringing units like Toma, Xiangling, or Bennett with you. Tighnari, for example, can actually get away with bringing other DPS with him where a lot of units can't, because he can unload all of his damage so quickly, and then you need to swap off to somebody else, and then they get a chance to do the same thing. Lyney, on the other hand, has that beautiful frame data that Ganyu has for his charge attack, which means he can actually use it without needing something like Tighnari's skill to help that out. The one major downside I see to all this, especially the mono pyro part, is, as anyone who played Ganyu for a long time knows, if you play her without a shield, she feels pretty bad. And while Lyney may not nearly be as reliant on his charge attacks as something like Ganyu was, it is still a very important part of his kit, and you're going to want to not get interrupted when you're doing that. And since that means you need a shielder, you're going to be limited in choices, being mostly Toma and Xinyan if you want to use her as a shielder, which I would not recommend. You can instead try to rely on something like Dia's interruption resistance, which is quite potent, but even large attacks will still knock you back. And another downside is you'll still be taking damage, albeit reduced damage, but still damage, and that may take him below 60% and prevent Lyney from gaining stacks. And also, yes, if you were wondering, the damage reduction that Dia provides does not work on the HP consumption of Lyney's charge attacks, which is a real shame. I didn't expect it to because it's not technically damage taken, but that would have been a really cool synergy between them. It would have allowed him to get more charge attacks off above 60% before needing healing. Oh, what could have been. One day, Dia, you'll get your day someday. Of course, there's another option. Forgo Viridis and Veneer, say screw even that one reaction, and go Zhongli instead. Just embrace the Geo and Unga Bunga your way to victory. The major upside here is you get a massive shield on a charge attack user, and again, that always feels good. It sucks to get interrupted when you're trying to do a charge attack. And if for some reason managing just Viridis and Veneer with 3 pyro is too much for you, well, then you still get a little bit of resistance shred, and without even that little bit of effort. But let's talk weapons real quick, because with 3 characters having similar playstyles, it's surprising that they don't actually overlap that much. Lyney's best option, which should surprise nobody, is going to be his signature weapon. Much like his A4 passive, this wants him to include 2 other pyro members in his party. And despite the fact that he's going to have Bennett and Pyro Resonance, this is not too much attack given the huge percent damage bonus his A4 passive gives him. On top of this thing having a crit damage substat to complement his crit rate ascension. And while Ganyu in general may appreciate the Amos bow, Lyney won't exactly have the same appreciation for it. He'll benefit from the charge attack aspect of it just like Ganyu does, but his other abilities are a lot more important than Ganyu's, at least in terms of Melt Ganyu. Now Morgana Ganyu, yeah, it's a little bit of a different story. Her burst is definitely the focus there. Lyney definitely won't be coming for Tighnari's signature weapon either. You shouldn't be building Elemental Mastery on him. And what are you going to trigger with that? Nothing. So Tighnari's signature weapon is safe in his hands for now, unless you're using it on Ganyu for Melt Ganyu, because that's totally fine too. We also have a brand new option that all 3 of these characters can utilize. The Scion of the Blazing Sun is the brand new Battle Pass bow that buffs charge attack damage. Now this is a little bit preferable to most craftable or free-to-play charge options that we're used to, because this one actually has a crit rate substat. And luckily for Lyney with this crit rate ascension, it's not too heavily weighted towards the substat and actually has a healthy amount of attack as well. Yolon's bow is of course going to be an option as well, just like it is for Ganyu and Tighnari, due to the insane amount of crit damage on this thing, as well as just a general 20% damage bonus for existing near enemies. It makes it a pretty strong choice for really anybody. Given that they're currently sharing a banner together, well, this weapon banner is probably the best you're ever gonna get. If you are rolling for Lyney, then this weapon banner, it's probably never going to get better than that. But if you're not and you're maybe on the fence about getting him, then his bow might have trouble finding home on other characters. Some people may say Ganyu can use it, and you could probably do some kind of mono cryo team, but if you're not willing to break your team like that, you're probably just gonna run something like Morgana, and that's only 2 cryo characters. By no means is it ever going to be a bad unusable weapon. It's still an excellent stat stick, and even if you only get partial stacks, it's still some kind of benefit. So my final thoughts on Lyney and how he fits in with Ganyu and Tighnari, I really enjoyed him. I played him a fair bit. I did some of the old elite farming routes I used to run with Ganyu, and you know what? He felt very good. Even shielded Hilly Charles, who would charge at you with their stupid shields. For some reason, whether it was coincidence or not, every time I fought one of the shielded Hilly Charles, he seemed to bypass their shield with the second hit of his charge attack. Which does make a little sense, because Tighnari's does the same thing, because the projectiles kind of go out and hit them in the side instead of going right to the front. I was personally really excited for when Tighnari came out, because he was another charge attack user, and again, I enjoy the playstyle. I like being able to forgo Genshin's auto-aim system and just hit whatever I want to hit. The downside to Tighnari, of course, is that he just does his damage so quickly and then you gotta swap off of him, whereas Ganyu, I could basically never swap to another character if I wanted to. I just occasionally have to shield myself if I'm gonna be fighting something serious. So while Lenny may not be what I hoped he would be, and that Lyney and Lynette don't synergize nearly as much as I would have expected, I am still excited about how we ended up. I really enjoy his kit, and he just feels like a Ganyu that can do a little bit more than charge attack. So if you were on the fence about it because maybe you thought he was just going to be Ganyu 2.0, did this change your mind? Does he look a little bit more interesting to you than the usual charge attack character? And by usual, I mean the whole other two we have. Let me know in the comments below, and thank you to you for watching. Thank you to my members and my patrons for supporting me as always, and I'll see you in the next one.
Attaboy!